You're listening to the Full Contact Poker Podcast with Daniel Negreanu. And now your host, Daniel Negreanu.
Welcome, everybody, to the 13th episode of the Full Contact Poker Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Daniel Negreanu, Kid Poker, D-Negs, whatever you want to call me. It's all good with me. And on our show today, we have a special guest who is really well-versed in all things poker. He's been in the poker industry for a very long time. He hosts his own podcast, Heads Up with Remco, another one with Poker Central. He actually works with Poker Central now to create content, some really good stuff. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with his work way back from when he used to work with Poker News. He used to have the Remco Report, which is now morphed into, as I said, Heads Up with Remco. And you can find all that stuff on the Poker Central network. I think you can just look for that in your podcast catcher, and you'll find all the podcasts. Yeah, they do 2 every week. They're do 1, which is kind of like a what's up in poker type thing, and then of course you have Remco, who does his really solid in-depth interviews. And I listened to last week's; it was really good. It was with Dan Coleman, who he's a tough interview to get, as you guys may remember when Dan Coleman beat me heads up in the one drop for $15 million. There was a lot of controversy over the fact that he was unwilling to speak to any media, so he stands in front of this big pile of money. I remember there's a picture. He's standing in front of this big pile of money. I came second, and there's they couldn't talk to him, so the media came over to me. I'm like, how does it feel to be a loser? I'm like, pretty good. I got $8.3 million. If I can be a loser like that every day in my life, I'll be okay. But since I've grown to know Dan, through the years, and I've seen major maturity. So I highly recommend you check out Remco's podcast there, and then go back, because he does a whole bunch of good ones that you guys are really going to enjoy, with Bill Perkins and a whole host of people, and you'll hear from him on terms of how he chooses his guests going forward, leading up to the Super High Roller Bowl. As for me, I played one tournament probably since the last time we spoke, just at the Aria 25K. I jumped in for the Friday night. And I didn't go back for the next day, because I was kind of just gutted. I've rebought 3 times, and I went 0 for 5 on flips. And I'm not telling you this to whine about bad beats, but just to let you know too that part of the way in which those ARIA tournaments work is it's pretty turbo-y, especially after the rebuy period. So they start around 2:30 typically, and by after the 9th level, which is a 30-minute level, rebuys are over, and the average stack is pretty shallow, so you just see a lot of shoving, and it's not a lot of post-flop skill so much. It's a lot of pre-flop stuff like that. So if you're not running well in flips, you're not going to do well. And this is going to lead into my topic that I wanted to talk about before we get into the interview about how we sort of overvalue somebody's run in tournaments or cash over the short term, and underestimate how much variance can keep certain people out of the winner's circle for a while. And I've experienced throughout my career, 20 years, moments where I've run super hot and just won everything. And that was me playing well, no question about it. But it also helps when the cards are cooperating. And I've also gone through phases in my career where, seem to be getting it in and losing. And, I've been on one of those, little bit of a streak over the last year, but not worried about it, because I'm looking at the decisions that I'm making and I'm happy with them. I'm looking at, the ways in which my chips are getting in. We're going to talk a little bit about the High Roller Bowl, but last year I was, I think after day 1, 3rd or 4th in chips, jumped into day 2. I had Kathy Lane all in 2-1 favorite twice. She beat me both times, and then I lost the flip, and that was it. Boom. Poof. It's rare to see me go through that many chips, especially with, hour-long levels, because I play a pretty snug style where it's hard to get me all in with the worst of it. What I really want to talk about is, who is the best poker player in the world? Okay? It's an interesting question that everybody, talks about. We talk about it in different formats. And for years and years and years, since Chip Reese has passed away, a gentleman by the name of Phil Ivey has been considered the best all-around poker player in the world. Now, poker is more than just no-limit hold'em, and Phil Ivey plays all the games well. The one thing I find interesting about that is you've never heard, and you won't hear, Phil Ivey ever say that, okay? Because Phil Ivey lets his, results, he doesn't, it's not important to him, and besides, he's aware that, first of all, there's no way to prove it. I mean, there's just, and this is really what the meat of what I wanted to talk about is So, for example, let's say heads-up poker, right? It's like, who's the best heads-up poker player in the world, and how do we prove it? Well, you could use the old Doyle Brunson formula, which is, the whoever brings the hunter who brings home the most furs, is the best hunter or whatever. But that doesn't hold true with poker, because take a guy like, for example, Dan Bilzerian, who's won millions and millions of dollars playing in games where he's just a really big favorite. He's playing with pretty weak players. Now, if you pitted him up against, some of the geniuses that exist today, well, he's not going to win. He's not going to beat them. So you can't necessarily judge based on the amount of money. So how else do you judge? Do you judge it by, okay, let's say, nobody will play Phil Ivey heads up. So does that make him the best? Not necessarily. A couple reasons why that's not necessarily true. One is another player may feel like he has an advantage, but so small and so insignificant that A, it's not worth its time. Maybe B, he can't beat the rake. Or C, he just doesn't want to flip coins for super large sums of money. Which brings me into the other possibility, which is it's very, very likely that the best heads-up player in the world plays at the high stakes. Although that's not necessarily a fact, right? There is the possibility, okay, very, very unlikely, as I said, it's a remote possibility that some guy who plays 5-10 heads up is the best actual heads up player in the world. It is possible that he just has a shorter bankroll, has other leaks maybe, spends money, or just doesn't want to gamble high against the best players in the world. Now, I don't believe there's much of a chance that player could be the best in the world, because it's very difficult to hone your skills to become better unless you are facing the elite competition. And typically, you're going to find that elite competition at the very top, right? So other ways, like say tournaments, right? We look at player of the year races. Okay, well, that just represents who had the best year. Does it mean that they are the best player in the world? It means that they had the best results for that year. You look at the all-time money list. I'm number one on that list. Does that mean I'm the greatest poker player of all time? Of course. No. It certainly doesn't. All it means is, results-wise, I've amassed more tournament cashes than anyone else. And with the numbers escalating the way they are with tournament buy-ins, that would be hard to hang on to that title in perpetuity. There's a word with a P. Why don't you guys Twitter it? I know there's a P word. In perpetuity. I think it's is it perpetuity? No, that's not the word, right? It's not perpetuity. In perpetual, it's something like that. Google it and educate me. I didn't finish high school, so pardon me. Another way in which people, so for example, on the notion that, well, nobody would play me, so I must be the best, okay? Yeah, I went to Bellagio at 9 a.m. A few weeks ago to go play poker. Nobody would play with me. I wanted to play. So I guess, and then I left and the game started at 11:30. So I guess for that 2.5 hours, right, I was the best high-stakes mixed game player in the world, right? For that 2.5 hour span, nobody would play me. I was like, hey, man, come on. I'm sitting in Bobby's room. Nobody would play. 11:30, they came, obviously scared to play with me. So that clearly means I'm the best. No, it actually does not. So anytime you hear someone saying, I'm the best heads-up player in the world, or I'm the best tournament player in the world, or anything like that, know that the likelihood of that, it's always possible, right? It could be possible, but this is an opinion that many people hold about themselves in terms of being the best, but it's simply not a fact. It's not a verifiable fact, and there's just no way that you can, in poker, much like I remember the old movie Color of Money, when Paul Newman was talking to Vince about, well, who's the best player right now? And he said, oh, son, the ball was roll funny for everybody, right? Well, that's a very minuscule look at what's possible in poker. There's very little luck in pool. So typically the guy who's winning all the pool tournaments is probably the best. In poker tournaments, that's not always the case. And certainly, in cash games, if you find yourself at the highest limits playing, against the best players in the world and you stop getting action from anybody, there's a decent chance that someone says, you know what, this is not profitable for me. But it simply it's not a statement of fact that made that person the best. Because again, like I said, there could be somebody even better who just doesn't want to bother, right? And there's also the likelihood that there are other people that nobody will play either, right? Or that nobody wants to sit with as well. So, anytime you hear that, it's like that's sort of a boastful comment from somebody. Just understand that it's an opinion, and it's certainly not something they could ever prove, and it's most certainly not a fact. Okay, so somebody whose job it is to kind of create interest and narratives and, storylines. Obviously, this stuff is really, really important and valuable. The all-time money lists, the player of the year races, the heads up for rolls matches like Kate Hall and Mike Dentale. Any sort of a buzz certainly makes this next guy's job easier. And he's going to talk a little bit in this interview about how he chooses his guests for his shows, how he chooses a narrative, some of his most favorite moments being an interviewer of some of the top stars in the game over the last year. So after this short break, we're going to be back with Remko Rinkema. All right, so I'm joined by the one and only Remko Rinkema. I've listened to that so many times because he's done podcasts forever, from Poker News to now Poker Central. So we're going to flip the script on Remko. You are the guest. How that must be different for you.
It's honestly one of the weirdest feelings possible since I've almost never been on this side of the conversation, and I already want to take over right now and ask you how you're doing.
Yeah, of course you do, right? All right, this is going to be an exercise as you get to share, and I'm going to start like right from the beginning, really, because I think for a lot of people, they wonder like, how does someone become like a poker media member? Like, what do you go to college to learn how to do this? Like, how did you get into this world in the first place?
I mean, it's a very straightforward question with a very complicated answer, but I can just sort of give the brief overview of the story. But basically, I was trying to actually go to school for this. I was going to journalism school back in 2008, I think. I started in 2007. I dropped out in 2008. And at the same time, I was also very hooked on poker, and that's one of the reasons why I dropped out. And I was still living at home and very much involved in the Dutch poker community. At the time on pokernews.nl, they had one of the biggest poker forums in the world, not even just in the Dutch language, just in the world. I think we were second to only 2+2 and Pocket Fives and a few other ones. So it was a thriving community, and I was a big part of it. I was an admin on the forum and going to all the meetups that they had. And when the 2008 Master Classics of Poker rolled around in Amsterdam, one of the oldest tournaments in the world, actually, I think right behind the Irish Open, and then obviously a few events in Vegas, they said, we need a guy. We need someone to help. And I was already going there just to have drinks with the people from the forum and sort of to see what it was like. I had been there once before, but I didn't really know many people. So when I showed up in 2008, they said like, oh, we actually can use a pair of hands to write some updates, and we heard you are doing journalism. And at the time, I had already dropped out, but still, that sort of sounded better than me saying, yeah, sure, I'll make some shit up, as we go.
Yeah.
So they handed me a pen and a piece of paper. I ran around like a maniac for 3 days, put in 16-hour days for no pay. Like at least nothing was agreed upon. I just wanted to sort of see what it was like. I got a little bonus at the end for my hard work and some free drinks with the staff. But yeah, I loved it so much those first couple of days. And it sort of spiraled out of control really fast from that point on. I think it was 2 weeks later that I was in Prague for the EPT. That was back in season 4 of the EPT, just to sort of get an idea of how long ago that was. And then it sort of gradually built up. I went to Copenhagen for the EPT, the one that was won by Jens Kilonen, who recently quit playing professional poker, followed up by my first World Series in 2009. And yeah, I mean, it sort of grew very, very slowly and steadily from there. But that was my first start, and I have to add to that as well. I owe my start to Frank Obdewoord, Mr. Web Joker, who gave me a chance, and he basically told the other guy who was working alongside me in Amsterdam that he wasn't going to cut it, and that he wanted to bring me to Prague. So that was a big leap for him as well.
A lot of lessons in there for people. Like, I think especially with today's young poker community, and that, like, when you described that, you basically said you just jumped on, did 16-hour days with no pay. And I can relate to that because when I started in poker, you did a lot of media things, you did a lot of this and that without any expectation of pay. Whereas today's younger players, sometimes even for a side interview and a final table, they're like, well, what's my EV in even doing this interview? Which is very, very different than sounds like, to the kind of the grind you were on way back then.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can sort of, jump on that right away, the first year in 2009, the first full year, the only thing that I had in my mind was, if this fails, then I can still go back to school, then I can still, choose a new path, but I need to maximize my experiences in this first year, because who knows, the 2009 World Series might be the only time in my life that I'm going to Vegas. And that was really on my mind. I really thought that this might be the only time I get to go to the World Series of Poker. So I really put my nose to the grindstone and went super hard. And that sort of, gradually turned into more and more work, and I became busier and busier. So yeah, that was really like a lesson that I learned for myself, is that if you really want something and if you really give it your all, you can achieve a lot of things.
My goodness, would you go to Choice Center or something? What is all that? No, so I have this belief, okay? Maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I have this belief that a lot of people in poker media, like, they didn't start out with the idea they wanted to be poker media, but they wanted to be like professional poker players, and maybe that didn't pan out or anything like that. Did you ever have any sort of urge to be a professional poker player and fall into this, or was there never a consideration?
Well, those two eras were sort of disconnected in my sphere, my world. I had that idea when I first started playing poker back in early 2006. That's when I discovered the game of poker. That's when the poker boom really hit the Netherlands. And at that point, I was practicing really hard. I bought all the poker books that I could find in the local bookstore. And I think for 2006, 2007, 2008, for almost those 3 years, I had the idea of wanting to, play professionally. I had some nice scores. I paid for some, fun trips, and I really, did some cool stuff with the money that I won. And I'm still paying back for that right now because the Dutch government got on my ass, and I'm paying a whole bunch of taxes for those winnings back in the day. But the dream of becoming a professional poker player was already far gone by the time I started covering events, just because I quickly became aware of how much effort and dedication people were putting into the game of poker. And on top of that, we're also talking about sort of the top 1% when it comes to smart and talented people. So from my point of view, is I was a hard worker. I studied a lot for the game of poker, but I was never the most talented player. So by the time I covered my first EPT, I quickly realized that, I was on the right side of the felt, it being on the rail. And that was probably where I belonged. But it didn't take away from the fact that I still loved the game, that I still studied a lot. And I want to say that right now, even though I rarely play, I'm a much better player than I was the year before and the year before that, just because I have a lot of high-level conversations, or at least I listen in on a lot of high-level conversations with all these players that I get to interview.
It's ironic you say that, because I listened recently to your podcast with Dan Coleman, who talked about the difference between, kind of old school people who had talent, or himself, and essentially the younger pro today is basically a poker student. So it sounds like if you would have come up in poker today, you would have been in the perfect spot, because you would have just been able to be told, this is what you do, and you study well, so maybe you could have been a Fedor bot.
I mean, I also when I was talking to Dan Coleman, which was a really, really nice interview that I had with him, you can sort of taste the talent in every word that he says. He is such a smart guy, and the same goes for Fedor. And I don't want to ever sort of make the assumption that I could be anywhere near those two guys. But sure, hard work can get you really far, even in poker. But I think that a lot of people, even people who right now work in poker media and still play on the side, I think a lot of people highly, highly underestimate what it really takes to be a professional player.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would say that for what you've created, the odds being stacked against you were so high. And what I mean by that is this. Poker News, I remember the first time I'd really seen you, doing interviews, Poker News had always hired sideline reporters that were typically hot women. Now I turn into Poker News to watch a video, and it's this Dutch dude with a big beard, and I'm like, he's got an accent, he's not from America. Like, how, first of all, did you convince them to allow you to do that? Or because there's never been a guy who had that role, and then to have a guy who English wasn't his first language, how did that all come about?
Confidence, baby. I don't know. It's a good question, and if I want to think back to that summer when I first got a shot, I think it was just me telling Donnie Peters, who was in charge of the live reporting team at the time, and Sarah, who was in charge of videos, like, if you guys are short a person, give me a chance. Like, give me a shot. I'll happily do it. I had never done it before in English, but Frank and I had done a lot of videos in Dutch over the years. So I covered my first tournament in 2011 in English. So people also have to realize that for the first almost 4 years of being in poker, I didn't do a single thing in English. Everything was in Dutch. Live reporting, articles, videos, everything. Frank and I also started Poker News Radio. It was a Dutch podcast before podcasts really became a thing. And so we had a lot of experience in creating content. The only difference was we didn't do it in English. So when the situation arose, I think this was in the 2014 World Series, that two of the video girls, I think one got fired and one quit. So they really had to scramble to get someone in front of the camera on Sarah's days off. I just offered myself and said, like, I've done videos before, but never in English. Let me just, give it a shot. So they gave me the reins and they said, just, run with it, see what you can do. So I went for the easy sort of interviews, getting some guys that I knew from a couple of years back. Dan O'Brien, Jason Mercer were some of the first guys I interviewed in English. And I was extremely nervous, but at the same time, I got really positive responses from YouTube, which is usually not the happiest place. And I sort of built on that. And I think that if I look back at my old videos from that first summer, they're horrific, like they're terrible, and I look extremely uncomfortable. But that was also partly because I'd never done it before in that spotlight, and I think I've grown a lot since. But it was just a matter of getting an opportunity and then sort of rolling with it.
So the fact that you didn't speak English initially, I mean, did you feel like that was an obstacle? Because it sounds to me like you basically had confidence to fight through it, but with a little bit of nerves. Did you feel like it was a barrier in any way?
I don't think the language was a barrier. I think it was mostly the thought in the back of my head that so many people are going to watch this that have opinions about everything you say.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing in doing on-camera stuff is letting the thoughts slide of people are going to judge this. And once you let go of that, it becomes so much easier. I had the same thing with podcasting in the beginning. When I first started recording podcasts, I was very sort of almost overthinking what I was going to say, and then it came off, not as natural as it could have come off. So from that point of view, it was all about sort of letting go of that. But it also didn't help that I was sort of swinging for the fences, trying to get the biggest names in the game, because I wanted to deliver as well for the people, watching content. And, as you know as well, the World Series of Poker and gathering content is extremely hard. It's a grind. But in the end, it's the dedication that really, sets you apart from other people. And I've always had that spirit of wanting to bring something extra and wanting to, get the most interesting people in front of the camera. And I think I succeeded in that in the beginning, especially when people, were sort of willing to give me a chance. And, after a while, it becomes you become more comfortable in that situation, doing on-camera stuff. And I think the biggest contributor to that was also the fact that I knew a lot of these players from, sort of talking to them, going drinking with them, which makes the sort of conversation a little bit more easygoing.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you've obviously done a ton of different interview styles. I know that you've hosted podcasts where you talk about poker issues. You also started the Heads Up with Remco podcast, which is like the one-on-one thing. And I'm wondering, in journalism and media, we talk about neutrality, where, you see someone on CNN, they're not supposed to be left or right, Republican, Democrat. They're supposed to be neutral. Do you feel like it's at all important for you when you're interviewing somebody to be neutral, or are you just comfortable sharing your opinions even in those environments?
I want to say that I grill people much harder when I know them well. So, for instance, if like tomorrow, as the time of recording, I'm talking to Jason Mercer for the Heads Up with the Remco show, and Jason and I know each other pretty well. So I'm going to be sort of harder on him than on someone that I don't know as well. So I feel like in that sense, I'm keeping it neutral from the perspective of not favoring him in any way, or letting him get away with some mediocre takes. So in that sense, I feel like I go harder on people that I know versus people that I don't know that well. I'm just going to let them speak more because in those cases, they usually have things to say that I don't know either. And part of doing podcast interviews is not just asking questions, but it's also letting people talk and giving them a chance to tell their story. And even if I already know the answer to some of the questions, I think it's important for the audience to get to know these players as well. And I think that's part of the narrative/storytelling that is my responsibility as a member of the poker media.
Yeah. Now, this next question I have for you is, I hate it when people ask me this question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. They always, anytime ask me for a story or the best this or that. You've done a lot of interviews outside of the one that you've done with me, which was obviously the best one. What are some of the, more memorable interviews that you've done that you just thought were the best ones?
Well, all right. I have a few answers to this question. Obviously, I've done a lot of shows. One thing I want to touch upon, though, was an interview that we did a few years ago for igaming.org, a very long written story, which was something that I spent so many hours on getting it right. And that to me was one of the coolest things to do, because we really took some time you gave me the time to dive into some of your personal stories from the past. And I thought that was an amazing thing. Like we used photos from your past, and that sort of storytelling is one of my favorite things to do.
You should sue, because they made a movie about that called Kid Poker on Netflix. I'm sure you can sue somebody.
And they used the pictures that you gave me. So I don't know. I don't know what's happening here, but and they probably read that story before they even talked to you.
Must be, yeah.
But anyway, that is sort of an example of what I love so much about this, and that also translate into what my favorite interviews are. And the first one that comes to mind is Matt Berkey from this past summer. He told me his life story. He grew up in poverty, raised by his grandparents. And even when he moved to Vegas, he had a ton of swings, going up and down, going broke many times, getting staked to get back into action, and then ultimately making it into the high stakes at Aria, and winning a bunch of money, and being able to live very comfortably because of that. And that was a very revealing story. And he went so deep into his personal life that I was actually at times while recording just like blown away by how much he was sharing. And Berkey's also written blog posts about this, and I would highly recommend people listening to just Google Matt Berkey blog. You'll be able to find a lot of stuff that he did. And at the same time, re-listen to that podcast, because it was very it was very eye-opening to see where he came from and where he ended up.
Yeah,
and then
I remember listening to that. He was very open and vulnerable, and I think that really is a way to connect with people. And that seems like that's what would make for a good interview.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then there were two other ones that really stood out to me. That was the Kara Scott interview that I did this past summer. She shared some deep emotions about her past that she told me after the fact she'd never said before publicly. So to me, that felt like, I don't want to say that it felt like something to be proud of in a sense, but it felt to me like, the fact that she was comfortable with sharing that with me on a podcast sort of meant a lot. And I thought that was an amazing thing. And the same goes for Mike Sexton, who was in the middle of promoting his book. He told a story about how they were doing the first Party Poker Million, and after, I want to say it was the first big satellite where they directly qualified people into the tournament. It was him and a few of the Party Poker staff members from the early days that went to the local 7-Eleven to get a few beers because they had a successful night. And Mike got choked up telling the story, sort of reminiscing, putting that all together and going from like basically nothing. I think he went to India to teach the programmers what the game of poker was, to create the Party Poker website, and then to see that culminate into the Party Poker Million and sending people to this cruise. That was such a huge victory.
You're just a big softy, Remco. Are you a crier?
Oh, I have a good cry every now and then when I watch a good movie or a TV show. Oh, The Office, by the way, I never watched The Office until I guess a month ago. I think I cried in like 7 episodes.
In The Office? That doesn't seem like a spot where tears would be warranted, but okay.
Trust me, you got to watch it. The whole storyline is pretty compelling. Yeah. But like, of course, these are memories of the Remco Report that I used to host, and now that I've started the Heads Up with Remco show, I'm once again diving into all these personal stories, and the Dan Coleman show from last week is definitely one of my favorites, just because I had never heard Dan speak in depth about so many topics that I had so many questions about. And as I said in the interview myself as well, I didn't agree with him when he beat you in one drop, and I was very vocal about it on social media at the time. And I even said that to him as well. I said like, hey man, I didn't agree with you back then. And we had a really good conversation, and that to me just showed that people change, and you learn from past experiences, and that doesn't just go for Dan Coleman, but it also goes for myself. He's
certainly grown up in the last couple of years, and it's great to get to see just his introspection in terms of growth and looking at himself when he was just when he says these young kids. I was laughing as I was listening to it. He's talking about these young kids. I'm like, dude, you're 14 years old or something like that. Young kids. He's 25. So you got Dan Coleman on, and I'm just curious, like when you're doing these weekly now, like how do you choose who's the guest you're going to have on that week? What do you look for?
Well, I'll let you in on my big secret. Until the end of Super High Roller Bowl, my goal is to have a player on the show every week that is participating in this year's Super High Roller Bowl. I felt like it was a nice lead up to the event. Obviously, now that I work for Poker Central, it has even more value. But I might have even done this if it was still in the old Remco Report setting, just because I feel like it's a unique opportunity to get these people to really talk about their lives and talk about what's happening, and tie that into the ultimate end goal, which is Super High Roller Bowl. And obviously, some of the biggest names in poker are playing in that tournament, so it would even make sense to continue that after the summer or after the Super High Roller Bowl finishes. But that was sort of my ideology behind this. And, we'll see how long I keep this streak going, because it's not easy to get some of these people to commit to an hour. Mm-hmm. So, we'll see how long the streak lasts.
Yeah. So speaking of the Super High Roller Bowl, I mean, the buzz around that event, in certainly in the community and the circles that I travel in, and it seems like with the poker fans, it feels like, for all intents and purposes, outside of the main event, like the premier event. Certainly the event that the top pros look most forward to. Like, what do you think it is that they're doing right that has created this kind of new prestigious event to take over, from everything else?
There's a few things that set the Super High Roller Bowl apart from other big buy-in events. One of them is the sheer buy-in and prize pool and payouts. We're playing for $6 million. That's obviously a huge deal. It's $300,000 buy-in, which is massive. So it is, the biggest buy-in of the year, unless Macau does something crazy. But from the perspective of it being the biggest tournament, it is actually a fact. It is the biggest tournament of the year, because in the main event, there's 6,000 players putting up 10K instead of the limited field for the Super High Roller Bowl. Secondly, it's the production. If people listening haven't been on the set or haven't seen it before, just Google some images of the Super High Roller Bowl, and you'll immediately realize that it has a completely different look and feel to it, which makes it seem, and it is actually, much more exclusive than your average tournament. It's the lighting, it's the camera setup, it's the feature tables, it's the outer tables, it's just everything in that room is just all class, and it's high roller. It's a high roller atmosphere, as much as you can say that. And then there's the players. It's the best in the world competing against each other for one of the biggest prize pools of the year, mixed in with some of the most entertaining characters outside of what you could consider, the best pros, but also, respected recreational players, successful businessmen, and people that are great on TV. And that mix creates something that's so unique in this game, and the way it's being broadcast and the way it's being recorded by Maury and his team just turns it into a once a year event that you can't miss. And I'm looking at the player list right now. There's not a single player on this list, aside from maybe one or two, that I couldn't tell you a very interesting story about. And the fact that we already have those stories out there about these people that are going to play in this event just, makes sure that we have an amazing final table to look forward to, even though the event hasn't even started yet.
So let me ask you this, right? Because I think there's one other aspect that, you didn't mention that I'm curious how much bearing you think it has on the success of the event is, I've played in a lot of these high rollers and the ones that don't have a shot clock. And sometimes you've got 8-9 minute tanks where people are facing 1/3 pot bet on the river. How much do you think the shot clock plays a role in the overall production quality and interest of the entire event?
I think that events of this size and this size buy-in should always have a shot clock, just to move the action along, just to keep it entertaining for the viewers, and to make sure that we don't get into situations, like you said, where on a live stream where you're trying to keep the audience entertained, you're going to see 8-minute tanks on the river when there's not a lot of money at risk. So, yeah, sure, I think the shot clock is a great addition to this tournament, and I think it belongs in all the high rollers. But I don't think it's the deciding factor, just because if you would ask any player in this tournament, what's the main reason for participating, I don't think anyone would say shot clock.
Right,
I think it's
right.
I think it's an awesome rule that's in play for this.
I'm thinking more rather than from the players' perspective that are actually in the event. I'm thinking from a viewer's perspective. Like, we've looked at the main event that's been live streamed for since November 9 or whatnot, or since they've been doing it on ESPN, and there's always criticism about it being a product that just bores the casual viewer. And the reason I mentioned the shot clock here is because I think it's much more palatable for average viewer to watch this thing, because there's just more action, right? There's just more happening rather than Antonio having to fill dead air because there's nothing happening for 7-8 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. And for someone who's been standing around poker tables for the better part of 8-9 years, having seen endless 10-minute tanks, this is a great development for poker. I know that Aussie Millions has been doing it for a very long time with the 100K challenge and the 250K challenge that they always have, and I think that this is something that'll evolve into the future, and I think we'll more and more see this happening in tournaments of this size.
Okay, so so for fans out there, right, who maybe missed it last year, it was on CBS Sports. Like, because I'm a professional poker player, I TiVo'd it. So I have it on my TiVo, and I use it as a study tool in preparing for this year. But if I want to watch this thing now, right, I can't find it on YouTube. I find little clips here and there from Poker Central. But where can you actually, like, how do you watch it if you're just a regular person?
First of all, everyone who's listening should subscribe to our YouTube channel just to keep up with the latest. We have a lot of amazing video content coming out. Every single day there's a new video that comes out, and we have some of the most iconic hands from the Super High Roller Bowl from previous years on the channel that people can watch. And then I would say download the Poker Central app to stay up to date and to watch the broadcast, and stay tuned, obviously, for PokerCentral.com updates on the website, as we have some exciting developments as the summer approaches. Things will become more and more clear. And it is exciting for me right now that we're in March and that we're talking about the World Series of Poker, and we're talking about what's going to be next. And I can only say that watch this space. Keep an eye on.
Okay, I hear you. That's good stuff.
Doing a lot of exciting things.
I get there. I've been in those places before where I have some knowledge about something that you just can't quite share, and people they can taste it. They're like, "Oh, come on, Remco, give me more." But totally respect that and understand why you can't. So that moves me into essentially my next question, which was, since you seem uniquely qualified to answer this, from your perspective, what do you think poker needs more of in order to make it more popular, to see it grow? And I mean, I'm not going to ever buy into the idea that we're going to recreate the boom that we had before, but from where we're at now, what do you think we need to see more of?
I'm definitely with you on that. I think that the words poker boom are heavily overused, and it is more a question of creating a strong foundation for poker to grow organically and continuously. And I think there are so many factors to that it's very hard to single out one thing or the other. I think that the media has a responsibility in the sense of creating good narratives around the players and making sure to highlight the young and up and coming players and giving them a platform and introducing them to the largest possible audience so that people get familiar with these names, and therefore when they see them on TV or when they see an article with their name on it, they are triggered to read it and watch it and listen to it. And I think at the same time, there's also a sense of responsibility from the organizer's point of view, from the online poker client point of view, from the player point of view. And all these different facets of the game are more important than ever before, just because we can no longer rely on there to be another poker boom. I feel like, and this is something I talk about a lot when I'm in Vegas during the World Series of Poker, I feel like it is the responsibility of the players, and then I don't mean the pros, but I mean every single player that sits down in a poker tournament, to make sure that the people at his or her table have an enjoyable experience. So whether that's, a nice conversation or a compliment or, asking someone how they're doing, that's where it all starts. And you don't have to be a professional, and you don't have to be, you don't have to feel like you're qualified to strike up a conversation with someone just because, you feel comfortable in the games you're playing. But I feel like it's our collective responsibility to give players the most enjoyable situation as possible, just because we want them to return to the game and we want them to feel like they're a part of this. And
so I can tell you, like, I've heard, like, over and over, I've heard the same story from whatever you want to call them, poker fans or poker viewers or casual viewers, where they say this. I don't necessarily believe this to be true, but this is like a lot of perspectives I've heard before. And that's, oh, poker today, it's all these kids with hoodies and sunglasses, they just take 30 seconds, they're boring. It's not like the old days, right? And I think about the old days, and while we certainly had some colorful characters, we also had some flat-out nerds that were packaged in such a way and produced in such a way, or their story being told, that created interest amongst poker fans. So how much do you think it is in terms, like, the production's responsibility to market these people, or just the players to have their personality shine through?
Well, obviously, we're talking about a very different group of players nowadays. Without naming any names, there were a lot of players that became famous pros in the early 2000s that weren't actually, the best players in the world. They were just very entertaining characters that had their moment to shine. And just because the average playing style at the time wasn't that advanced, these people were able to survive, and these people were able to play in these 10K buy-ins, and therefore, take their space in the spotlight time and time again in the early years. And on top of that, there wasn't as much poker being broadcast on TV as there is now. All our memories about poker in the early days are tied to one or two things, and one of those is the World Series of Poker. If we think back of what the World Series of Poker used to look like, it was sort of a highlight reel of exciting hands and table talk, condensed into episodes about the World Series of Poker main event and some of the side events. Right now, there are more hours being broadcast about the main event alone than all the World Series of Poker episodes 10 years ago, which was not only the main event, but also a bunch of side events. So just from that point of view, is we get to see so many more hands, so it's so much harder for every single one of those hands to be exciting. And put on top of that we have November 9, which is, 16-hour broadcast 3 days in a row of live poker. And obviously, that's going to be a lot more boring than a condensed 1-hour version of that, in which you see the highlight hands, the highlight table talk, which makes everyone look crazy and fun. And it just gives a very skewed look into what the game of poker is like. And I'm sure you can speak to this, Daniel, that back in 2003, 4, 5, there were also countless hours where it was extremely boring to play at a feature table.
Right. So that sort of sums up in a sense like my question in terms of, is it on the production to, because I think obviously with the Super High Roll Bowl, they've done a really good job of just making the poker interesting. But I wonder, just to appease the random poker fan who tells me it's like these young kids are boring, right? Do you buy into that, or do you just feel like it's, the way in which poker used to be produced, and, that has nothing to do with young kids having like less of a backstory than maybe Sammy Farha and Dave Devilfish Elliott and Mike Sexton and Doyle Brunson and the like?
Sure, there is something to say for the fact that there were more colorful characters, just because it was more feasible for the likes of Devilfish to become successful in poker back in the day as opposed to right now. So sure, that is part of the argument, and you can make that argument, and that sort of holds up. But at the same time, there was only one Devilfish in the whole world of poker. And if you were not sitting at a Devilfish table, you might as well have been in a different tournament, because it doesn't really play that way. So while I do think that maybe the younger players are a bit more introverted and not as crazy, just because they don't have a pool hall background in which they had to hustle to get a buy-in and to get into the next poker game. I also think that just because of the sheer numbers of players currently that are actually very adept at the game, you just see a very different crowd that plays the average 5K tournament or 10K tournament.
Yeah, you would think though that with more players that are regulars on the tour, that you'd see like there's like a bigger pool of personalities that can come out of that. And I think that from what I'm hearing you say, and I agree wholeheartedly, is that the barrier for entry today, in terms of the type of personality you have to be good at poker, and I've heard many people make this argument, is typically analytical, and very math focused, and you just can't get by being a good old hustler who can talk people out of like full, folding on the river or something like that.
Yeah, but also going into my second point to your question, I also think that we as poker media, but also, Maury's company, Poker Productions, has a duty to highlight the narratives of these people, because let's not forget that guys like Alan Cunningham and Eric Seidel became huge names in poker, and they were also not table talkers. They didn't say a word most of the time. Mm-hmm. And I know that Seidel is really funny, and I've heard him talk and all that sort of stuff, but he's not the most talkative guy. So it's much too easy to put this all on the poker players, because if we give them time to tell their story, and if we highlight their personalities, and if we take a camera into their lives, then obviously we can find the same compelling stories about these guys as we could back in the day. And of course, there's going to be people out there that are boring. There's going to be people out there that have no real interesting backstory. But I think in maybe 90% of the cases, if you spend time on finding those stories and creating those narratives, the guys of today that are under 30 can be sort of the next generation's, exciting people to watch on TV, just because once you know their stories and once you know their backgrounds, they become much more interesting characters. And the best example of that, in my opinion, is Bryn Kenny. Bryn Kenny is someone who obviously, he looks like an outgoing guy, but he doesn't say a whole lot at the table. He'll chime in whenever there's a conversation, but he's not going to seek it out. But then when you listen to him on the podcast or you see him in a video and you get to know his backstory, all of a sudden that might be your new favorite player. And that's because we now know what his story is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I totally agree with you in everything that you just said there. And I'm wondering, when do you think that shifted? Because clearly, obviously when, the World Series was broadcast in its early days, they would literally create a story, a narrative for each episode where they focused on a hero, a villain, whoever that would be, and they sort of created these stars. Do you feel like production companies or televised poker has shifted out of that into a more serious, professional kind of production rather than focusing on the actual personalities of the players?
I think that 411 Productions definitely took a different angle on how to showcase the World Series of Poker. And if you look at 03, 04, 05, 06 as well, it felt much more like a documentary that you were watching. It was a very dark, grainy setup. They had the black drapes very close to the table, which made it feel very intimate when you were watching the final table. So obviously that contributed to this different type of feel. And the last couple of years, since Poker Productions has taken over, it is much more of a live sports feel. And I think that poker needs that in order to compete with other live sports. And with so much live happening and people craving live action, I think that is a big part of the evolution of poker on TV. And at first, a couple of years ago, I was an advocate of, reverting back to the old style of doing the documentary style and showing it like that. But I just think that if we're looking forward, 10, 15 years into the future, we want poker to compete with things like esports. And if you look at an esports broadcast, that's all flashy lights, and it's hardcore, in-depth strategy talk by one of the commentators, and the other commentator is the lead person who keeps the show going, keeps it rolling, and keeps everyone on point. And I think that we in poker also need to find that balance. So I think that the live sort of sports feel that it has right now is the right approach. I'm just not sure if we have to have these massive unrealistic expectations of poker, having another boom again. And tying this into the Super High Roller Bowl, I think that has the perfect feel as well. It doesn't have the live sports feel the way the main event does, because it has this very exclusive feel of a room that you could never enter unless you have the secret password. And
yeah.
And that also has a very, very strong appeal to the people watching. So there's sort of different ways to do this. And let me also add to this, that high stakes poker, which is also done by Maury, had a completely different feel than the main event, just because they're so different in what you're trying to achieve, the type of people you're trying to highlight, and the type of experience you're trying to give your audience.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's one other thing you touch on regularly in your podcast, because I'm an avid listener, and you might be the biggest list nerd that I know. You love these all-time money lists and all these kind of things. And I wonder why do you feel like that's important? Because ultimately, I was talking about this in the intro, that it doesn't define who the best is, right? Because it's just a list of, okay, this is what happened. It doesn't actually have any real deep meaning other than that. But like, why do you feel that's important? Something important to focus on?
Narratives. It's all about narratives, and this goes into the unknown German pro that we've never seen before that's going to play in the Super High Roller Bowl. It is my task to uncover the narrative of that player so we can then have a frame of reference when we talk about that player in the future. The same goes for something like the all-time money list. That is a perfect frame of reference, and it is a perfect start of a narrative if you're talking about certain players. And one of the things that I always joke about when someone who's been very successful wins their first bracelet, no matter what they've done in the past, they will always be referred to as WSP bracelet winner, whatever the name of that person might be. So I think that these lists and these stats and, how many cashes someone has and how many 7-figure scores someone has, or, how many 6-figure scores in 1 year, those things are all part of a narrative. And as a member of the media, and I don't want to call myself a journalist, but as a member of the media, I think that those things are essential into making poker into a sort of a consumer experience the same way professional sports does that. How many rings does he have? How many MVPs does he have? Obviously, a lot of these things are arbitrary. MVP is something that people vote for. The all-time money list is skewed because, you don't know someone's ROI. But at the same time, these are things that shape a narrative. These are things you can talk about. These are things that will end up on a Wikipedia page.
And you're right. There's a great analogy in sports, like something like baseball, where, you have the record watch of like how many home runs is this guy hitting? Like, is he going to break the record? And then with poker, we have the Player of the Year races. We have the World Series of Poker races. And it creates an interest in like a daily interest in like what's happening. Did Jason Mercier pass him? Did he, win the 2-3 bracelets or whatever the case may be? So outside, I think ultimately what it is it's fun, right? It's just fun. It's just something fun to look at. Like, does it matter if Mark McGwire, whatever, like hit more home runs, like in the bigger picture in terms of like who wins the championship? No, but it's just fun things within the game that you can focus on. And it's, obviously you're in the poker media, so there's not always a lot to talk about.
No, but like also let me add to that, like something like the Kate Hall versus Mike Dentale heads-up match. Personally, from me as an audience member, I wasn't all that interested. But as a media member, I'm very interested because this is a narrative we can talk about. We have multiple angles. We have people who root for one party. We have people who root for the other party. There's side action. There's a Twitter war. There's all this stuff happening. That is part of what makes poker as a game, an overarching game, into a fun thing to follow. And we need that sort of stuff to keep the ball rolling. I think it's very important.
Okay, so if I'm just random, I'm a 23-year-old poker player. I'm coming up on the scene. I'm getting better. I've had a few final tables here and there. How do I get noticed by Remco? How do I get, sort of involved? And how do I allow my personality to shine? How do I get in the biz, as they say?
I'd say if you're starting on that sort of grind, as I want to call it, to become more known and to get some more media attention, I think social media is the first step. A strong social media profile and interacting and jumping onto conversations is extremely helpful. A lot of people that I follow on Twitter are not necessarily the biggest names in the game, but they are the people that I find the most interesting to talk to and to listen to. So I would start with that. I would start with social media, and Twitter is probably the strongest one in poker. Just because, you can send a tweet to Daniel Negreanu and who knows, he might respond to it if it's about hockey or or if you're making fun of him in any sort of way. And I feel like the threshold to reach people is so extremely low. And if you're coming at this from a very positive point of view, you can get close to people very quickly. And let me just say that if someone listens to this podcast and wants to have a chat with me about what I said on the show, you just tweet at me and I'll respond. I think I've responded to 99% of people that have ever tweeted at me, just because I appreciate people taking the time to reach out, and I want to return that to them as well.
Where do they tweet at you? We're going to tell everybody to tweet at you right now. A whole bunch of questions. What's your Twitter handle exactly?
Well, I recently changed my name, and it's now Remko Rinkema. It's my full name.
They're never going to be able to spell that.
I finally grown up. It is Remko Rinkema. That's my Twitter handle.
All right, we'll make sure to add that to the show notes at the bottom.
And then also, if I can add to that, when you're playing a big tournament, there's always going to be bloggers around. Whether you're playing, a World Poker Tour, or whether you're playing a Heartland Poker Tour, or you're playing a European Poker Tour, which unfortunately no longer exists in that wording. Make sure to strike up a conversation with the people there. If you have a story to tell, if you satellite it in, if you came all the way from Australia to play in Copenhagen, that's the kind of stuff that we look for as media. And the hardest part about our jobs is uncovering those stories without having any clues to what the story might be. Because if I see a table with Daniel Coleman and Scott Seaver, it is very easy for me to focus on those two players because I've seen them before. I know what their background is. I have some narrative because they're both in the top 10 of the all-time money list. And for me to then notice you in the 2-seat, squeezed between those two guys, it's going to take me some reason to sort of dive into that. So,
and I would imagine that, like, you mentioned how difficult it is to get these stories, and I imagine part of it is like privacy. Like you can't just be a media member and going like while they're in a pot and go, hey man, where are you from? What's your story? Tell me your life story, right? They have to show some interest.
I'm very blunt, and maybe that's my Dutch background. But I'll be the first to approach someone and to ask them for their name and where they're from. But then obviously, if they say sorry, I don't want to receive coverage, or my wife doesn't know that I'm here, then I'm also not. Which happens all the time. Yeah. Then I'm not shy to sort of be like, okay, sorry, man. Good luck in the game. And I have one golden rule: once you're in the money, then there's no more restrictions of what I can write about you. But yeah, no, that's sort of how it goes. You have to really get after it if you're trying to write a story. And sometimes you get to hear about stories in the weirdest ways, and those turn out to be the best.
Okay, so this question came in from Twitter, and it said something like, what was it about Martin Derbyshire that made, apparently he's your hero, or he was the one who you mentored under in terms of how to write your articles?
I've worked with Marty a bunch.
That was a joke, but
I wouldn't call him my mentor. But I have a lot of respect for Marty in the way he came up in the game and all the stuff that he's done. I don't agree with some of his more recent takes and articles, and I've told him that as well when we're working together. But obviously, I also feel like, and let me just say this, I also feel like poker media or writers in poker should have the sort of free reign to write very, very edgy stuff and give their opinions. Like we should not be limited to giving no opinions at all. Obviously, there's also a scale and there's also a range in which.
Sure. Well, there's a line that can be drawn where if what you're writing could essentially make a player experience that we want to play with worse, where he's like, I don't want to be embarrassed because of what this guy wrote about me. And so from that perspective, you have to walk the fine line.
Yeah, obviously. But it is definitely a thing that we, as a media industry in poker, we need to grow. And as much as poker is a very new thing when it comes to it not having been around as long in the spotlight that it is right now, I feel like the media aspect is so much smaller and it needs to grow so much more. And I really hope that if poker can grow, media can grow with it. Because if I look back on the people that I worked with back in 2008 and 2009, there are so many fewer bloggers and writers in the game just because there's not as much money being made anymore by the websites that used to rake it in with all the affiliate money being out there.
Well, the good news is, Remco, you're in a good place because you're making all the money. You're doing the hard work. I just want to thank you for coming on the show and just acknowledge you for that work and the confidence you had to just step up and put on a skirt and say, I can be the next Poker News hostess, beard and all. So I want to thank you for all the work you do. And so if people want to find out, because you have a list of things that you do with Poker Central, where do people go to download the podcast? What are their options for that?
Well, the first thing, thank you, Daniel, for the kind words. I really appreciate it, and you've been kind enough to give me a lot of your time over the last couple of years, and those have always turned into really good pieces of content, whether that's written or even videos we've done in the past. If people want to listen to my podcast, which they can do, go to your favorite podcasting app, search for Poker Space Central, subscribe to the Poker Central Podcast Network. That means you'll receive 2 podcasts a week. On Monday, you will get the Poker Central podcast, which is a new show that sort of, talks about every single thing that's happening in the game of poker right now. And then on Thursday, we have Heads Up with Remco, which is a weekly show in which I interview some of the biggest names in the game. And you can even go back and listen to the one I did with Daniel a couple weeks ago, which we recorded in the Bahamas. which is a very interesting conversation. Daniel was giving some hot takes. So
yeah, they were hot and spicy. I was steaming.
Don't miss out on those. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, Remko Rinkema is my name. I'm probably the only Remko really on Twitter, though. So if you just search for Remko Twitter Poker, you'll also find me if you can get the name right. And then, PokerCentral.com. We have a lot of exciting content. We have a lot more exciting content coming up. And the YouTube channel is also hot and heavy. We have a lot of stuff coming out there. And every day we have a new video going up. So, don't miss out on any of this stuff. I think that if we want to succeed as poker media, we also need the love and support from the poker fans. And hopefully we can sort of, find the right way to create good content for the people that are watching and listening. And if you guys have any ideas or any hot takes, please send them to me on Twitter. I will happily put them in my notes and bring them to the next meeting.
I've been loving the new Poker Central content, those short little videos, quick, fun, sexy stuff. So good job with all that, and I'm excited to see what's next for Poker Central and looking forward to your take on the Super High Roller Bowl. Remember, guys, listen every week to Remco because he's heads up with Remco because he's going to have a player, according to him, each week that will be playing the Super High Roller Bowl. So you get some insight, and then you can watch it live. It hasn't been released yet where they're live, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're still going to talk, and that's going to be announced soon.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, thanks again for your time, buddy. It was fun to flip the script on you.
I mean, it's very uncomfortable, and every single time at the end of my answer, I had to restrain myself from asking you the next question.
Yeah, I get it, man.
I appreciate it. It was awesome.
All right, man. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Take care, bud.
Take care.
Guys, well, as promised, I told you that if you sent me some hands at dnegspodcast@gmail.com, if we thought they were interesting enough, I may read them out on the podcast and give you a little breakdown or my thoughts on, how you played it. And of course, remember, if you are going to send some hands, make sure that you give me the pertinent information. Do not write a book. Tell me the blind level. Tell me how many big blinds you had and any stack sizes that are pertinent. And just give me the action without the story of what you ate that morning or, the guy twitched or something stupid like that. Just give me the nuts and bolts of it. Otherwise, it's very unlikely to be read. So we're going to do a hand. We're going to go over a hand sent to me by Billy Wolf. Billy Wolf. Okay, so Billy Wolf writes, a few friends and I have differing opinions on how a hand in a tournament I was playing should have been played. We'd like to get your opinion. Well, here we go. So, this was a $250 tournament in which there were 110 players remaining, and the top 45 are in the money. Average chip stack is around 45,000. He has 100,000 for this hand, and the villain in this hand has roughly 90,000. So both players having really big stacks, right? Now, blinds are 8 and 1,600 with 200 antes. So, yeah, you got a lot of big blinds. You're doing good. For middle position, you pick up ace-9 of clubs, and he raises to 4,000. I like it so far. That's 2.5 times the blind. No problems there. The villain calls from the cutoff, and all other players fold. So he asks, any problems with raising here? Nope. That's absolutely, standard. And he says, are you ever limping in or folding with this hand? I'm not folding here, considering I'm doing this well in chips. You could maybe argue less than 1% of the time I may choose to limp in very specific environments against very soft fields. But the standard play, of course, is to go ahead and raise with ace-9 of clubs. So the flop comes good for our hero. The flop is 9-6-4, 1 club, 1 heart, 1 diamond. So no flush draw on the board. He goes ahead and leads out of position for 6,000, and the villain raises to 14,000. Okay? It's kind of scary, right? Now, he says, I re-raised to 25,000. I'm a mistake. I should have put in 28 though. Nope. Okay. So he says the villain calls. Do you like the initial bet of 6,000 or do you prefer check calling? Okay, so to answer your first question, I don't mind this. Yeah, the 6,000 is fine. What you should do in this case is sometimes you should bet your top pair with an ace. Sometimes you should be checking with hands like that. The standard play is to go ahead and bet because you're going to bet with a lot of your weaker hands against very specific opponents. If you've had some history with them and you've been checking a lot of flops and folding, you may want to check here sometimes as well. But I think the preferred play here is to bet, and I think your bet sizing is just fine of 6,000. Now, you didn't even ask this part of the question, but like the real big mistake you make here is way, one more way, overplaying this flop. You said you re-raised to 25,000, a mistake. You should have put in 28 or so. No. You flop top pair with an ace, right? So what are you going to do if the guy re-raises you? Like, are you planning on folding? Because he may do that with what hands? Maybe 7-8 suited occasionally. He could easily have pocket sixes, pocket fours. He could have a pair higher than a 9. He could have 10s. He could have jacks. Any one of those hands. So if he were you planning on like re-raising him on the flops so that you could fold to a shove or fold to a re-raise? The standard play here when you get raised is to call the 8,000 and not put yourself in the awkward spot where you may have to guess. So you didn't ask about that part of the hand, but that's probably the major part that really stuck out to me as being, the biggest mistake as it turns out in the hand. You don't want to overplay top pair with an ace kicker because first of all, if he's bluffing, well, he's not going to be bluffing anymore. You just sort of like the jig is up, right? So maybe he was trying to set you up with like a turn bet. Now he's just going to like, if you re-raise, fold. Whereas maybe if you called and now you check the turn, you may get one more bet out of him, right? So I definitely really don't like the 3-bet here. I mean, you could argue, again, in certain situations against specific players, if you have a history that you can 3-bet sometimes with top pair here, but I don't like it, especially out of position. Okay, now the turn is a 6, diamonds. You check, and the villain checks behind. So that pair is the 6. That's probably a good card for you, right? Because it's very unlikely that your opponent has a 6 in their hand. And now that they've checked back, you can almost certainly say that like your 9s are good. I mean, some weaker players may be checking back jacks or 10s or something better like that. But typically, if they've checked back the turn, you can safely assume that 9s with an ace is the best hand. So maybe he's just raising you with 5-7 suited or some sort of gut shot or even an open-ended straight drop. So now the river is the queen of diamonds. You check. I don't know that I check here. I think I would have probably gone for value because your opponent checked back the turn. So again, what is a queen going to do? The queen doesn't really change anything. There's not a lot of hands he has where he raises the flop and binks that queen. So if your hand was good on the turn, or at least it seems it was, then it should still be good on the river. So I probably would have gone ahead and value bet this river. As it turns out, you choose to check, which is not a horrible sin. And your opponent bets 10,000. Okay, well, now that your opponent's bet the 10,000, it's a pretty smallish bet. I mean, folding is completely out of the question. There's just no way you can even consider folding. And I don't think the hand is strong enough to raise because I don't think you're going to get called by enough worse hands. So anyway, as it turns out, Billy Wolf said he called and the opponent had aces. Was that a bad call on the river? No, come on, man. So obviously we look back, and I remember I used to do hand histories with John Jawanda, and he'd be like, well, did you lose the hand? I'm like, yeah, he had this. He's like, then you played it wrong. I'm like, no, that's not how poker works, right? It's not how poker works. As played, the way, him checking back the turn, there's just no way you can fold. Besides, you're getting a really good price. He's only bet 10,000. He wanted me to close by giving a shout out to Bettin' Danny Kidd, or check calling Andrew Dahl. Well, I don't know which side of you had which side of the bet, but honestly, if you're folding that river, you're folding way too often. It just doesn't make any sense. You pretty much, as played, have to pay that off. So hope that helps, Billy Wolf. It's funny because you asked a lot of questions within the question, except the one question, which detailed the one glaring error in your thought. So hopefully you guys learned a little bit about how to play those situations and not overplaying, specifically because of the fact that you have such a big stack, right? You said the average is 45K. You've got 90. The guys, you got 100. You're doing just fine. Why do you want to go to war with this guy with one freaking pair? Tranquilo, mi amigo. There's no reason to go berserko. Just chill. Maybe after you get the money, you can go to war with them, but like you're risking almost like a guaranteed, well, not a guaranteed cash, but a very good chance at least a min cash with the opportunity to do even better after that. So thanks for sending the hand. And for those of you who enjoyed that and want to have their hand read on the Full Contact Poker Podcast, fire away. A little bit about my schedule and my plans. I did not go to Panama. It was the first event they had there. Really, as I said, as I've gotten older, I've spread out my schedule a lot better so that I can spend a lot more time at home. And one of the benefits of that has been physical for me. And from a health perspective, I'm 42 years old now, and I can say without any reservation that I'm by far in the best physical shape of my life. I feel like I'm faster than I was when I was younger. I'm certainly stronger, far more athletic. I played soccer when I was a kid and I sucked. And I still suck, but I'm a hell of a lot better now than I was then. And my motto when I play soccer, and I play 3 times a week in 3 different leagues, and I have that luxury now because I'm home a little bit more, so I can join. It was part of what I wanted to create when I said I wanted a dream life, was the ability to kind of be a part of a team here in Las Vegas and do something regularly. And my motto for each game is make sure nobody works harder than you do. Run harder, play harder than everyone else. And I can honestly say that I believe that that's been the case, especially since my body's changed so much. I had a trainer in the past for, 3-4 years where, it's after a while, it sort of gets, you get into a rut, I guess. I saw results, certainly, but not to the point where I was like fully satisfied. So I went on my own. I went to a different gym at Lifetime. And when I went to that gym, as I mentioned, I wasn't really all that happy with my results. It was October 24th. And I didn't have it written here. My body fat percentage was 24.6%, which is fine, especially for my age bracket. It's considered average. Ideal for someone 42 years old is between 16 to 22% body fat. So it's just a little over that, but within the average, on the lower side of the average. So nothing terrible. I was eating a lot of carbs on the vegan diet. There's plenty of carbs you can eat, but I decided to take my health on in a real dedicated way. And I first started with the Jim Stoppani plan called Shortcut to Size, which was designed to build muscle. And it worked. It worked really, really well. And I followed that up with the Shortcut to Shred, which was a combination of cardio, 6 days a week of working out. You're doing HIIT training within the workout, and also a very specific diet regimen, which I followed to a T. I actually created a spreadsheet where I wrote out each day, like for the whole 6 weeks, what I was going to eat. So I essentially basically created 4 meal plans or 5 meal plans, and I just kind of repeated them. And then I switched them up every 2 to 3 weeks so that I had some variety, but I stayed on the exact meal plan for the entire time. So my results, I'm doing my own drum roll. We don't have sound effects yet. Christian's got to work on sound effects. So October 24th, I weighed in at 166 pounds. March 27th, I weighed in at 162.6, so with a loss of 3.6 actual pounds of weight, which doesn't sound like much, but when you hear what turned into what, I think that's where it's much more impressive in that my skeletal muscle mass, so, that just measures how much muscle you have, and I was at 70.1, and I measured yesterday, we're at 78.9. The big number, 24.6 that I mentioned, body fat, down to 15.0. So like better than ideal. And I even after finishing the Shortcut to Shred diet, I've added more carbs and I've lowered my protein intake, and I'm still losing fat and still gaining muscle. It's pretty incredible. I've really gotten in tune with what works for my body. And not going to lie, very proud of myself. When I started at the gym, they give you this piece of paper that shows you like how much fat you can lose, how much muscle you can gain. And I remember it said like I could afford to gain like 1.5, at least one. I have to get like 1.5 pounds of muscle to get back to like what's considered okay. So I need to add a little muscle. But mainly, it said I had 18.5 pounds of fat I could lose. And I measured yesterday and it said 0. So I lost 18.5 pounds of fat. As you can see, my weight didn't move much. I only lost 3 pounds from October to now. But much of that was because of muscle gain. And I highly recommend it. Like I said, he doesn't pay me. I don't know the guy. I've never met him. I've tweeted at him a couple times. He doesn't seem to care. I don't know. I guess he needs to see some before and afters first. I mean, I'll take one of those eventually. But I'm very, very picky about the before and after pics, right? You gotta have them look just right. Because you freaking people on Twitter, you're like, oh, that sucks, bro. There's no vascularity back in your back. I'm like, okay, well, check out my biceps, bro, that are about to just freaking fire through your face. I got more, since I got more muscle now, I'm tough, right? I'm a tough guy. I'm ready to fight. I always want to fight people. I took on Phil Hellmuth. I said, come on, bro. There were some people that wanted to do a show and they wanted to have me fight Phil Hellmuth. And I said, let's go. I'm down. And he said no. First and foremost, because he said, he didn't want to hurt me. Yeah, I don't know about that. Second, he said, there's not a lot of upside for him because if he wins, he's supposed to. And if he loses, he's looks like an idiot, but and I understand that perspective, but I can honestly say that, and I did a poll and he was really annoyed because most people thought I would win, and I'm actually certain that if we had a boxing match, not certain, but I think I'm a strong favorite despite the fact that he's a foot taller than me. Boxing takes stamina and cardio, and I'm in really good shape. Like I said, playing soccer 3 times a week, doing cardio, working out regular. So I don't know that he would be able to move around, if we make it to a second or third round, where I'm very confident that I could keep punching. I'm not going to punch him in the face. It's too high. I just go to the side. Doesn't look like that fight's going to happen. Speaking of other fights, not a fight at all, but I like this kid, another guy who does a podcast. He won Podcast of the Year, well-deserved, Joey Ingram. He on Twitter, he sort of like, threw some heat out. We're just having fun. It's all like literally just, friendly banter, where I said something about how I've made a lot of money in PLO, probably more than 99% of people. It's probably true. Maybe not 99.9, but I'd say clearly over 99%. I've had some big matches in the past in PLO, and I've done quite well. So we jokingly, I don't know, we threw it together, and I said, I'll play a heads up. I would, want to do something for charity if he wants to have fun. He loves PLO. Poppy loves the PLO. He's always trying to promote the game. So I'd be happy to do that with him because he's a nice guy, a good contribution to the poker community, and there are plenty of, good young ambassadors of the game. You talk about Jason Somerville, Jamie Staples, Jeff Gross, Jonathan Little. The list goes on and on of like really good young people who want to make a positive contribution to the poker and focus on, how this can be a fun social game for everyone. I'm going to add that song, the Prahlad song. Poker is fun for everyone. Anyway, enough about that. My schedule, as I mentioned, much more laid back than it was in the past. My next event, I'm looking forward to it. We'll be geared up for it. The Monte Carlo PokerStars Championship. It's a flagship event. I expect it to be improved. We've had some feedback from some players. Jason Wheeler wrote on Facebook a very well thought out critique of some of the live events, the one in Panama, for example. So did Bryn Kenny. And we expect to have a player council with them and sort of a town hall, if you will, maybe like a limited group that can give feedback to PokerStars about how to improve the events, like what matters to them, what ways can we make their player experience better, what bothers them, what do we need to cut, and things like that. And I can tell you that there's been a lot of internal dialogue about making sure that the live events are as good as they've always been in the past, and that this new brand, the PokerStars Championship, holds up to the great EPT that we've had and the other local regional festivals and things like that. And I'm very, very confident that we're going to see a lot of things improved across the board, and one of the key reasons for that will be player input. So just note that when you have input, people do listen, especially when you take a non-troll approach, right? So the approach like Jason Wheeler just wrote out very thoughtful, piece on his issues, not like going, screw you, burn, you guys suck. Like that's not going to get people to listen to you. It just doesn't work. It actually does more harm for your cause than good. So the civil, back and forth and discussion about, industry, about the industry and about live events going forward, really, really important. And I'm glad to see that those channels are open to the players so that they feel like they are heard. So I will be there for the 100K. I will also be there to discuss, with the players kind of, in that council meeting or whatnot, what's going on there. There's also a cash game that's going to be televised. A lot of you guys have been talking about, we need to have more cash games on TV like we used to with Poker After Dark and the PokerStars Big Game. And good news is we have a format that is much similar to what you guys saw with the Big Game. We're going to have qualifiers who play with some pros, and that should be a lot of fun. We'll be filming that in Monte Carlo, so expect to see that in the near future. And then after that, after Monte Carlo, we've got essentially less than, about 3 weeks before the Super High Roller Bowl, which is like essentially the premier event for high rollers these days. It's now the biggest buy-in, brings out the best players. It requires you putting a deposit down months and months in advance. And the day that they opened the deposits, we oversold. So the people at Poker Central decided to open up one more table. So instead of the cap being 50, it's now 56, I believe. So we'll have a nice size field and a real juicy first prize, and it will air. We don't know yet exactly where, but I know that they're in the works talking about where you can watch that live. And I know that the feedback from last year's show was incredible, and I expect this year to be even bigger and better. And then, of course, right after that, it's World Series of Poker time, and I've got something special. Yeah, I got a little something special for you guys once World Series of Poker comes up, and it is the following. No, I can't tell you. I'll tell you guys when you need to know, all right? But, expect to see some fun stuff. I've really been enjoying doing a lot more of this content. It's stuff I've been doing like for 15 years. If you guys have an opportunity, check out my YouTube channel, Dnegreanu, or just punch in my name and you'll find it. I started a new thing, which I thought would be fun, and somewhat in response to the idea that that I'm like sort of jumping on a bandwagon of some sort where it's called Throwback Thursday. And essentially we're going to look at hands that I broke down 10 years ago, 15 years ago. We're going to look at vlogs that I've done in the past. We're going to look at poker tips I've done. And I think they're really fun to do because I can like look back at, first of all, at the ridiculous hair that I had and like the skinny Twinkie arms that I had and laugh at myself. But on top of that, I can sort of look at what I was saying in 2005 and 2004 and whether or not that type of advice still holds true today. So, don't miss those. We rolled out the first one last week, actually the second one. I went over the Gus Hansen hand and some poker tips, and we've got another one coming out this Thursday, which will include Brian Rast, which has, it's really, really fun. We did a lot of cool stuff at Poker VT back in the day, some stuff that nobody's done since, where, we created live games and we went over the hands from more than one perspective. So it's a hand that involves me and Brian Rast, and you get to hear my perspective throughout the hand and his perspective throughout the hand. And then we look back again at whether or not the ways in which we were breaking down the hand still holds up today. Because as you guys know, poker has evolved. The way in which people break down hands is much more sophisticated today. So while the concepts were still born out of, historical understanding of the game, they've gotten to a point now where, especially the younger players, have learned in a very different way. It's less talent-based in the sense of just figuring it out. As if you listen to Dan Coleman on the Remco Heads Up with Remco talk about, it's less that and it's more studying. Okay, this is what you do with this hand in these situations, and kind of like learning like you would in in university or something like that. So much more evolved, but we're going to look at the past and the present, and of course always talking about poker's future. I just gotta. So you know what this is? This is that thing I do, right? We're at it again. We're at it again. Okay, this is where I'm supposed to just go. Okay, shut up. It's enough. People want to get back on their drives, get back to the workout. Want to end the podcast, listen to something else. So I'm gonna let you guys go with one more time. Tell you to check out all of Remco's stuff at Poker Central. Check out their YouTube and subscribe to my YouTube and send me emails at Dnegspodcast and and leave comments on YouTube and don't say bad stuff or I will report your ass. I will report you, and I've been reporting some of you. If you keep posting dumb shit on my YouTube, your ass is getting reported. Chat privileges, banned. That's it. I'm going to leave on that one. Banned. Peace out.